Globalists want your taxes. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee because we're going to be discussing, well, globalists or the IMF suggesting and pushing for more taxes here in Australia. Just what we need. We'll have a look at a few sides of the argument. One from the Sydney Morning Herald, we'll look at an article from the Guardian, and a few other things. But, what do you reckon, guys? Do you think we want taxes? Do you think we need international organisations trying to influence Australian national politics and push for more taxation? Fantastic. I'm gonna have a shot of coffee here because, it's just frustrating. It really is. Globalists pushing for more taxes. And, just wait. There'll be a push for universal taxes around the whole world. So, the IMF calls for more taxes. IMF says copy Abbott's budget repair levy and warns against big spending cuts. They want to keep spending. Keep, pumping that money out. Now, the question, just to put your tinfoil hat on here, could this be perhaps some influence coming from the Biden administration to encourage other countries to lift their taxes? Because, well, the US are going to have to lift their taxes. Maybe, perhaps. And notice how they call it a levy, everyone. A levy. Just so it's maybe a temporary tax, so you don't feel as bad, so you don't think it's a tax. It's a tax, everyone. It is. And if you're saying, oh, Florian, it's just for the rich, just for the wealthy. According to someone else, you're rich and you're wealthy if we look on a whole global scale. So, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, has urged nations to consider using the Abbott government's temporary budget repair levy to overcome the huge deficits left by the pandemic recession, warning deep cuts to spending could lead to political instability. And we'll have a look at, we will jump straight towards the government to the rescue section just quickly. And national debt is forecast to triple, everyone. The cumulative deficits across the Commonwealth and state governments will see national net debt rise from $393 billion in 1819 to pretty much $1.3 trillion in 23-24. There you go. It's tripling, everyone. It's just crazy how much debt we have now. This is why when people are speaking up the surprising economic recovery, how it's doing so well, look at how much money the government is just plowing into the economy. And this is just the slow progress to MMT, where they'll tax the money back out of you plebs. All of us will all get taxed. They'll milk us because they've got to fight inflation. And they'll tax it to get it out of there. And that just leads to more and more loss of liberty and control at the state level. Amid predictions, the budget deficit facing the Morrison government could be up to $15 billion less than feared. The IMF has also suggested taxes on excess profits, such as the abandoned mining resource rent tax. Now, with regards to all of these mining taxes, what I would argue that we need to have, rather than a tax on the profits and all of this, make it very simple. A portion of whatever resources are removed from the ground are donated to the Commonwealth, are given to the Commonwealth. Why not? Maybe only just 10%. Okay, well, the government will have to store it, or the government will have to send it away, or they'll just instantly sell it, but based on what is extracted. Why not? That's easy enough. Rather than all these other convoluted processes and systems. But we'll see. We'll see. So, governments around the world have all been forced to run huge deficits to deal with last year's pandemic outbreak. I'd like to see what the Swedish deficit is. We'll have to look at that in another episode. Because pretty much most countries have run huge and insane deficits. With collective deficits approaching 13% of global GDP, Australia's deficit forecast to reach $197.9 billion this financial year is close to 10% of national GDP. Now, this is the deficit. This is where the budget isn't bringing in enough to cover the costs. This isn't the debt, guys. We're now over $1 trillion in debt. And not just because they're just talking, I'm assuming they're just talking federal, because that other one that I referred you to in government comes to the rescue, that's including the states as well. We're all in this mess. And the problem is people don't seem to realize that the state level deficit spending, we all will pay for it one way or another. And, you know, the question I'll ask you later is, do you think GST is going to rise? How are they going to milk this money out of all of us? The IMF, in its Fiscal Monitor report ahead of this week's World Economic Outlook, said while governments have been forced to run large deficits, there had also been an increase in income and wealth inequality because of the outbreak. Now, I would say, no, it's not because of the outbreak. No, that's not what it is. The increase in income inequality is because the government interventions to try and address the outbreak is what's exacerbated the already pre-existing income inequality here in Australia. And for us, it's housing, okay? Everything goes into housing. That is the most significant measure of if your income inequality right there. It affects how you retire. It affects your entire quality of life. Because, you know, everyone is jumping in. It's creating a bubble. You know, money is driving up the price because of the Candlelight effect. It's the supply of money is going through housing in Australia. That's the argument I'd make. So, yes, now they're right here. Wealth inequality is continuing to grow. It said governments face difficult decisions on how to cover the large deficits while also not exacerbating inequality. I would say that here in Australia, we need to look at getting off our addiction to housing. We need to step away from that. The government needs to pull back. I would rather see some experimentation with parts of the country designated special economic regions and then less economic and interventions, pretty much making it easier to do business in those regions to create opportunities. Among budget repair options, the IMF said those nations with robust tax systems could look to increase top personal income tax rates, similar to the budget repair levies put in place by the Abbott government in 2014. So there you go. Only the top. Only the top. And there'll be viewers in this channel that pay the top. You know, it doesn't take much to creep up to that top tax rate, everyone. You're not talking the super rich. You're probably talking a friend or someone else you know at work who's been good with investing. Or a lot of people who've done well with crypto investing. You're going to be hitting that tax rate this year, guys. Sorry to say. Maybe that dad who invested, 15 grand in theatre and now is a millionaire? It's not me, guys. So, temporary increases in personal income tax. Temporary. Temporary. Often restricted to the highest income brackets, were previously introduced during exceptional circumstances in Germany, Australia, and Japan, it said. The budget repair levy, which was a 2% impost on people earning more than 180 grand a year, ran from 2014 to 17, raising more than $3 billion to help reduce the budget deficit. Oh, fantastic. $3 billion, if you look at, from the size of the budget, it's not that much, is it? The IMF said another option was so-called economic rents, or super profits, targeting those sectors that had done well during the pandemic. Taxes on excessive profits. Excessive. What's excessive? Taxes on excessive profits, either in addition to or instead of the regular corporate income tax, so they want to put more taxes on businesses, can assure a contribution from businesses that prosper during the crisis, such as some pharmaceutical and highly digitized businesses, while not affecting companies and their workers, otherwise earning minimal profits or incurring losses, it said. The fund warned trying to repair budgets by cutting expenditure on services or support to those left behind by growing inequality could lead to substantial political problems. Governments need to provide everyone with a fair shot, enabling all individuals to reach their potential, and to strengthen vulnerable households' resilience, preserving social stability and in turn macroeconomic stability, it said. The risk is high that trust in government could deteriorate after the pandemic. Well, how's your trust in government, everyone? Perhaps this is not the right channel to be asking people how high their trust in government is. Probably, is it lower than it was in the past? Especially if government's response to the epidemic included supporting Support to people and firms as well as vaccination is perceived to be inadequate or marred by favouritism or corruption. The Morrison government has pledged not to increase taxes, as the Abbott government pledged ahead of the 2013 election, and then they did anyway. Do you trust any pledges from politicians? Are they worth anything? Very high iron ore prices, strong GST returns, and a better-than-expected economy are already reducing the budget deficit. Better-than-expected economy. Well, how much money are you shoveling into the economy? Deutsche Bank economist Phil Odengo said it was not inconceivable that the deficit could be half of what had been predicted in the mid-year update. That's the deficit, not the debt. He cautioned everything would have to go right for that to occur, which would result in a deficit of about 100 billion. Even that would still be a record budget shortfall. He said a deficit of about 150 billion was more likely, which would set up the budget for future years. The better starting point in 2020-2021 also means smaller deficits across the forward projection period. On our revised profile, the federal budget could conceivably return to balance by 2025-26, he said. Return to balance, everyone, not pay off the debt. Not pay off the debt. That's the thing. And, interest payments on the debt the government has are very low. So you think they're going to want interest to rise. Will they have control over that? ANZ economist Hayden Dimes and David Plank said the deficit would be as low as 155 billion because of the better-than-expected economic conditions facing the government. But they cautioned some of this improvement was due to GST receipts. Due to the way GST is refunded to the states and territories, the better revenue this financial year could end up a shortfall in 21-22. GST currently makes up a little over 25% of the improvement in the deficit since the mid-year update. If that continues to hold and the deficit continues to improve, it will potentially have a meaningful negative impact on next year's underlying cash balance, they said. Now, the IMF are talking about political unrest. Here in The Guardian, they're talking about fears of social unrest. So I thought we should go through that to provide an alternative perspective, just to this, these social consequences of it. IMF calls for tax hikes on the wealthy to reduce the income gap. Now, is earning $180,000 a year, is that wealthy? It's better than the average. Much better than the average. Significantly better than the median, but it isn't insanely wealthy. You could probably be earning much less and living a much happier and comfortable life because you're not probably keeping up with with a bunch of arrogant friends who want to show off to each other. So let's have a look. The IMF has called on governments to close the income gap between the richest and poorest that has worsened during the pandemic by spending more and taxing wealthy households. That's it. So a government to spend more and tax more. That's the solution that the IMF is proposing. Because the government interventions into the economy to mitigate the spread of this illness have been disproportionately affected lower income people. People working at retail shops. They haven't been able to work. There have been other people that have not been affected at all. Even people in construction haven't. In a warning that the economic shock triggered by the pandemic could undermine public attitudes to the fairness of taxation and welfare systems and to lead to social unrest, I think if anything, that's already way too late. The danger is we've got this big I'd say a generational push. A bunch of young people have lost their faith in public institutions. And the danger is they'll be pushing for more government intervention. Can you blame them? They've lost faith. The danger is that's going to lead to more authoritarian governments, and it's not going to be the outcomes they want. The Washington-based organization said surveys showed governments would have the support of the public if they shifted the burden of taxation away from low and middle earners to better off members of society. Calling for governments to provide everyone with a fair shot. The IMF said despite government finances coming under pressure from health and welfare spending during the pandemic, ministers needed to enable all individuals to reach their potential and to strengthen vulnerable households' resilience, persevering social stability, and in turn broader economic stability. The IMF, which acts as global lender of last resort and has issued tens of billions of dollars worth of loans to developing countries, often with quite dubious terms and conditions. But that's for another video. Over the last year, he said trends during the pandemic that have accelerated a move to digital services would damage the job prospects of unskilled workers and lead to higher rates of long-term unemployment. Against this backdrop, societies may experience rising polarization, erosion of trust in government, or social unrest. These factors complicate sound economic policy making and pose risks to macroeconomic stability and the functioning of society, it said. Recent surveys in the US and Europe showed a dramatic rise in the approval rating for more progressive tax policies. The IMF said, though it was unclear how long the majority of voters would maintain their approval once the recovery was entrenched. The pandemic, so you better hurry, don't miss an opportunity here. You're going to see more and more people will be using this as a means to get political control and power. The pandemic has confirmed the merits of equal access to basic services, healthcare, quality education and digital infrastructure, and of inclusive labour markets and effective social safety nets. Has it? Better performance in these areas has enhanced resilience to the pandemic and is key to the economic recovery to benefit all and to strengthen trust in government, it added. Oh boy. The managing director, remember, the IMF is very closely related to the WEF, the World Economic Forum. So if you see similarities in the language and the tone and the, shall we say, socialist and authoritarian slant here, don't be surprised. The managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, I butchered that, and the outgoing head of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Angela Guria, has spent the past year urging governments to deploy their resources, including borrowing facilities to support welfare programs for businesses and households at risk, widening inequality, and social unrest. The UK has dramatically increased spending over the past year and has penciled in a further boost, especially on health, schools, and transport infrastructure in the next financial year. But the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, cut $14 billion from unprotected Whitehall budgets in 2021-22 and said he would begin increasing personal and corporate taxes from 2023. There you go. In a move Labour described as economically damaging. UK puts up their taxes, Canada puts up their taxes, Australia puts up their taxes. US won't look so bad, will it, putting up their taxes? More than 100 countries have approached the IMF about receiving help since the pandemic led to the biggest contraction of the global economy since the 1930s. A package of loans worth $500 billion, mostly for poorer countries, is due to be announced next week at the IMF and World Bank Springs meeting. The expansion of the IMF's special drawing rights, extra funds to help developing countries cope with the economic effects of COVID-19, is expected to go ahead after the US Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, said the US would reverse its previous opposition. If governments can meet demands for basic services while strengthening transparency and accountability, trust will improve, the report said. With limited fiscal space, governments will need to prioritize efficient gains towards the most affected by the COVID-19 crisis before scaling up spending. At the same time, governments should plan medium-term policies for better basic services and better protection from income shocks while fostering a job-rich and inclusive recovery. I mean, it all sounds good, but fundamentally this is not the role of government. The role of government is just redistributing resources from one to other. That's what they see it as. The role of government should just be to maintain law and protect private property rights and step back. But no. Because remember, all of these loans that these countries are getting, that is your future work that you will have to do. Because look, they're talking about raising taxes. Taxes is forced work for the state. That's what it is. You are forced to work for the taxes. Sure, a lot of them are spent, or some of them are spent on things that you appreciate, but a lot of it is wasted. And we'll have a look at that breakdown later in this video. But that's what you have to remember. Where the IMF, the globalists, are encouraging these countries to go into further debt, to spend, borrow. And that is future work from those citizens that they're going to have to do for the IMF. You will be working for the IMF, guys. For the globalists. It'll be worse than some other countries. If governments are unable to meet the challenge, the erosion of trust could lead to more polarised politics, in which some call for a smaller government. There you go. While those affected by illness or job losses would urge for more government services. I think we're seeing more call for government services. They might also want to have fears of growing nationalistic tendencies around the world. So, government to the rescue. So here we're talking about the national debt forecast to triple, from 393 billion to 1.3 billion with change. Falls in interest rates mean public debt interest payments, here we go, to service the debt are expected to remain flat at around 1.3% of GDP between 2018-19 and 2023-24. This is where people are not worried about it, or where our leaders will say, it's fine, don't worry, we'll go into debt. Look at that tiny, cost to service this debt. It's nothing. Only 1.3% of GDP for the civilization is deployed to pay that interest. The composition of national net debt is expected to change over the next few years. The state's share of national net debt is forecast to increase its average of 13% since the GFC to around 29% of 2023 to 2024. And you can see state revenue and expenses, and look at that shot increase there, and revenue pretty much has stayed the same. And by state, we're referring to the state debts there that they're incurring. And, well, states are going to keep on digging even more and more of a hole. Because where are they learning it from? From the federal. So here is our taxes. Taxes on income and profits in Australia here from 2017. We're number 2 in the world. So it's right up there, guys. We're one of the most heavily taxed countries in the world. And if we add all the other stuff, all the other levies, charges, and fees that we have to pay, come on. It just gets frustrating. You can't even have a beer without taxation. I nearly put $100 worth of petrol in the car the other day, guys. And I'm not putting any flash super duper premium, let's pretend there's these chemicals in there to make you feel good petrol. I'm talking the cheapest petrol I could find. Fill up the car, nearly cost $100. How much of that is tax? And this is where our taxes go. And this is from my last tax receipt breakdown. 40% on welfare, 19% on health, 9% on defense, education, public services, and there it goes. So rather than taxing people to try and squeeze a few billion out a year, maybe they could trim a bit of the fat here. What do you reckon? So, here's the other question I will put all to you, seeing how big our deficit is getting, how there is some talk of it returning back to normal. Will we see a GST rise? Let's have a look at this article, because even last year the IMF was doing the same thing. They were calling for, more taxes. The International Monetary Fund has urged Australia's COVID-19 economic recovery plan to embrace long-standing recommendations to reduce business taxes and increase the goods and services tax to boost investment and create jobs. So that's what they're calling for, guys. How high do you think the GST will go? I'm going to have a shot of coffee and you let me know there. Remember when the GST was sold to us that it was going to remove all these other taxes? Did any of them ever disappear? Wasn't stamp duty going to disappear once we got the GST, everyone? I mean, in some ways, it is one of the fairest taxes because it's based on your consumption. I would much rather we just have a higher goods and services tax and completely eliminate income tax. Can you see that happening? That would be real tax reform. But there you go. At least they're talking about reducing some taxes back then. Now now they want a super tax on businesses. In an exclusive interview, Washington-based IMF mission chief to Australia, Harold Finger, backed the Morrison government's plan to gradually transition away from the 102 JobKeeper wage subsidy, which has now come to an end. He said health restrictions and social distancing meant some workers would need to shift into growing industries and away from contact-intensive sectors such as travel, leisure, and hospitality. In the immediate phase, it made a lot of sense to maintain employment relationships, and JobKeeper and other measures saved millions of jobs, he told The Australian. But given the longer-term economic consequences of COVID, it made more sense to allow the reallocation of resources to take place. That is, well, you need to have some creative destruction in an economy, everyone. That is going to happen. As the recovery gets underway, the shift in focus will increasingly be towards economic reforms that boost productivity growth and investment and limit the scarring effects on the economy. Most immediately, he said, reforms should start sooner rather than later on upskilling and retraining workers, infrastructure upgrades, and simplifying business processes to reduce the regulatory burdens, similar to the government's announced policies, and tax reforms. But the government should also pursue broader tax reforms beyond the helpful budget measures, such as tax breaks for businesses and accelerated personal income tax cuts. What I would argue, and which has not been mentioned in either of these proposals, is to reduce negative gearing, to use this as an opportunity to get us off this bloody addiction to property, guys, because they're talking about investment. They're talking about investment here. The IMF wants investment in business and all of these things. Why the hell would you invest anything in business? Why would you start up a business in Australia when you can put the money in a house and you'll make a year's worth of income doing that? Let us know in the comments, guys, because I know there's some of you there that have made more money on a property last year than you have in your job. Or maybe you've just retired from working because you're just making enough money sitting on property. There's nothing wrong with that. I've got no problem with that. That's fine. That's smart. But it disincentivizes people from investing in other things. Smart people who could be building businesses that could create jobs and increase our economic complexity. It means we could maybe have more than one place in the entire bloody country to make masks. That's why they didn't tell you to put them on back in the day. There were none made. There was one machine that made it. There was two machines. My neighbor worked for the Air Force. The army and military had to go down there and rapid prototype and fabricate the parts to get the other machine up and running because it was being used as spares to keep the existing machine going. That's Australia there. But don't worry, we flip houses and sell coffees. So that's my two cents. That's what I would be encouraged to see. We need to get the government out of business, and that involves, that's not just all the good things you like, the reduction in regulation and the theater caused by governments pretending to keep you safe, but also the incentives that they put within the tax system to kind of manipulate the economy to one way or another. These are all things that have these distortions, guys. Here in Australia, it's resulting, I'll bring up the candle-on effect again, it's money will supply is going to be pushed through there. Every time someone borrows money, it creates a bubble. Now we've got growing wealth inequality gap, and you've got generations of people just struggling to get into bloody houses. So when there's just one chance for them, they see it tick down in property, they're jumping at it. That's what I would like to see. Who would be brave enough to do it? Shorty tried to. And the problem with Labor is they've got so much social justice garbage in there. I think the damage that would cause to our nation would be much worse than the housing bubble. I'm sorry to say. They are putting forward policy that's based on complete lies. So Labor needs to really clean house if it's going to get any if it's going to attract my vote, that's for sure, my support. I don't like the big two anyway. I'd rather we have a grab bag of miners in there where they actually have to do some work in Parliament, but I'm off topic. Anyway, so tax incentives targeting new investment and research and development are going to be key to boosting productivity and investment. Now that sounds nice, guys. Have you ever been involved in this research and development stuff? Some of the tax credits people get for R&D are just a complete joke. My landlord, he built an extension on the back of his warehouse, and he fabricated it using some some CNC cutting machines, and he could write it all off tax. He actually got more money back than he paid. I don't think it was actually worth anything. It wasn't adding anything to the body of knowledge. There's a lot of rubbish that's done there. I'd rather we just, reduce income tax for people, lift that tax-free threshold, rather than having all these redistribution of money from, remember, every dollar you suck out of the people, that could be someone's little girl's dancing lessons. It could be the money that they are putting towards to try and save for a house when rents are so high. The money doesn't come from anywhere. It's labor of people. The 30% corporate rate in Australia is relatively high and could be reduced. And if you've got an issue with that, you want corporations to pay more tax, guys. If you want to get a share of it, buy a share of the company. There are long-standing recommendations to shift the tax base away from direct taxes that are fairly large in Australia by international comparison, but indirect taxes are relatively low. Direct taxes are imposed directly on individuals and businesses, such as personal income tax and company tax. As a share of government revenue, Australia has the second highest combined tax reliance on personal income and business profits out of 34 of the world's leading economies, according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. And we saw that right here, guys. You're proud? Proud to be an Australian? Aussie, Aussie, Aussie! You know, we're nearly there, taxes. Yeah! Indirect taxes are usually passed on to consumers, such as the 10% GST. The Australian government raises only about half as much revenue, 12.2% of total tax from GST, compared to other similar value-added taxes, 20.2% in other countries, the OECD has estimated. But you know what? Any increase in GST, they won't reduce the other taxes. I mean, look at some of the reason these taxes have been put in place. You know, World War II's over, guys. We can get rid of, I think, payroll tax. It's just insane, some of these things. So, these solutions. Let your local members and senators know that they will lose your vote if they increase taxes. Contact them. Let them know. Tweet about it. You know, let potential senators know. Threaten to vote for a minor party, or even better, vote for a minor party. And I put old Pauline up here because there was a clip of her in Sky News when they were discussing this, and she, of course, was going, yeah, no, we pay too much tax already. Enough already. Yeah, you may not like her. You know, maybe there's certain things, certain policies for one nation that I'm not a fan about, but there are certain things that are quite good. And it's good we have a mix of politicians that can express the frustration of a lot of Australians. You want a mix. No one is going to be your one hero or demigod. I mean, we see it in the comments all the time. All the people are just praise Labour, 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 or praise Liberal, Liberal, Liberal. Guys, you're going to be disappointed by all of them. They're all going to piss you off one way or another. We need a mix of them. They should be arguing and fighting in Parliament to get things through. It shouldn't be easy. It should be work. We pay them enough. That's why you want a mix. So, that's what I'd suggest. We'll see. Because this is going to be an interesting next election. It really is. As always, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this in the comments below. Would you be happy with a GST increase if it meant a significant decrease in your income tax? If you're enjoying the content I create here, there are a few ways you can support the channel. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links from Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or AussieBroadband. You can buy merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, everyone. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.